thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm gonna mute myself. This is Nathaniel, the digital literacy coordinator, but I'm gonna let Sophie take over and get started tonight. So thanks again for joining us.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sophie. I'm with the Greenville County Library System, and I'm really excited to be with you guys today. So we'll be talking about Canada. Some of my personal background is I lived in Ontario for 5 years when I was a kid, and when I went to high school in Nova Scotia. So today, my main goal is to get you all to want to go to Canada yourselves for a visit when it's safe to travel. March is Upstate International Month, so in our own way, we at the library want to celebrate it and celebrate the diversity of the world, even if we can't go to these other countries at the moment. So if you are interested in hearing about some other countries, you should join us later in the month. We'll be learning about Denmark, Bulgaria, and Colombia. More information will be located on our website, greenvillelibrary.org, under the Classes and Events tab in the Virtual Events Calendar. That being said, I'm going to talk about several things today. First, I'll do a brief overview of the origins of Canada. I won't go too in depth though, because there's a lot to talk about in Canadian history. Like the US extends to before the country was formed, before the explorers came, and back when it was just the Indigenous people living there. And the Indigenous people and their history are also a huge part of Canada's story. Time probably won't allow for too much detail, but it's very interesting. And I would strongly encourage you all to read more about it if you are interested. Other things we'll talk about is just a little bit of the government, basic information, some culture, food, sports, and some vacation spots, the weather and the language, all that. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not an expert in Canada, so credit will be given where credit is due. There are some external sources that I used to kind of fill in the gaps of my knowledge, and they will be listed at the end of the PowerPoint. So that being said, the Canada name actually comes from the Iroquois word Kanata, meaning village or settlement. So it started being used in 1535. There was a French explorer, Jacques Cartier, who he was speaking with these two Indigenous peoples and was told about a route to Kanata. Now, he didn't realize that they were just talking about general village. The village they were actually directing him to was called Stadacona, and it's present-day Quebec City, basically. So Cartier called the whole area controlled by the chief of that village, Canada. So the French were the initial people who colonized Canada using fur trade, fishing, and development. And for a while, the majority of Canada was actually called New France. It wasn't called Canada at all. But as the area of Canada grew, as fur traders and explorers expanded their territory, the name of Canada started to refer to a larger area. And then around that time, the British also started to take over. And after a few wars, they ended up taking over New France, and it really started being called Canada. But the French were still there. So in 1791, Quebec split into Upper Canada and Lower Canada between the French and English to try to keep some of the peace, because there was a little bit of conflict. And I find that's kind of interesting because even today, more French speakers of Canada are in Quebec than in the lower part of Canada, which is mostly English speaking. So it's interesting how even today, like there's still, you can pull it back to that time frame. So and became an official self-governing country, but still under the British monarchy in July 1st, 1867, and it was known as Canada. It's actually kind of funny. There were a lot of other names that were actually in the running for it as well. It's like Victoria Land was one, Transatlantia, and Britannia is just a few of those. So currently, Canada is split into 13 provinces. It's a constitutional monarchy. The Queen of England is the head of state, but the Prime Minister is still the head of government. So the current Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau, and Canadians don't vote for their Prime Minister like we vote for our president. They actually vote for the party that then elects them as the Prime Minister. Its current population is 37.6 million. Ontario has the largest population next to Quebec, and this is a lot smaller than the US because the US right now is around 328.2 million. But part of that, I think, is because a lot of Canada, because of the winters, especially like further north, they're not really considered inhabitable for permanent settlements. So most of the population is centered in the kind of eastern part of Canada. So I did mention that there is a pretty definite French and English part of the country. They are both the official languages of Canada. So in the US, we'll often put Spanish on our like our directions and our labels as a courtesy because we acknowledge that there are a lot of Spanish speaking people in Canada, or sorry, not Canada, in the US. But in Canada, it's actually required by law to put both languages on all their stuff. And it's kind of funny because it even goes in some parts of Canada, it goes as far as like the stop signs and stuff. They mostly in Quebec, I think. I don't really remember ever seeing it in Nova Scotia or Ontario. I did see some on the border, the stop sign will say stop and let. But I think in Quebec, it'll be either stop or arrête or both. So my mom kind of thought this was interesting because she was in France for a while, and even in France, they don't really put arrête in French on the stop signs. It's just kind of a stop sign. So I found it interesting that Canada does still do that even for something like a stop sign, but it's very interesting. So there, even through the two languages, the English is still the main one. According to the Statistics Canada 2016 census, the first official language learned, 75.4 English, 22.8% French, and 1.8 is non-official. But this is a little bit different from the population by the mother tongue, like the first language learned in the privacy of your home. And it lowers English actually by quite a lot to 57%. French kind of stays the same at 21%. And then non-official languages is 22%, which is much, much higher than if you're just looking at the first official languages learned. Also with learning languages in Canada, I think sometimes the Quebecians, they don't really like that while they kind of have to learn both French and English, the rest of Canada doesn't have to learn French. But it is true that in schools, we didn't really have multiple languages that we could pick from. So like in the US, you can, in high school, you can choose to do Spanish, or you can choose to do French, or you can choose to do Italian, depending on what the school offers. But at least in the area that I was living in, the only option was French. And it wasn't even French classes specifically like how we do it here. It would be a French immersion program that started even as early as middle school, and sometimes even earlier, depending on where you were and what school you were going to. So as Americans, if you don't have a very strong accent, you can probably pass pretty easily as a Canadian. The Canadian accent is somewhat similar to Minnesota or Wisconsin, kind of. There are some fun little nuances. For example, for example, we tend to shorten it to just been. Oh, I've been to that place. But they like that E, they always say been. Um, the There was also like out. You may have heard how there's like a stereotype that it's oot and a boot. I never heard it that strongly pronounced, but there is a slight a sound at the beginning of out instead of out. It's more like out. They also pronounced a couple different food things differently, like bagels. They'll pronounce it more like bagel. Pasta is more pasta. And they say sorry, sorry. Also, maybe you've heard of Canadians saying a lot. That is very, very real. They'll put a at the end of pretty much any sentence. It's not a stereotype. Everybody says it. Everybody puts it on the end of their sentences. There are also a couple other words that are may have different meanings there than here. Not very many, generally speaking. They're not much different from us language-wise, but until I came back to the US after living in Ontario, I'd never heard of a toboggan as a hat. So up in Canada, it's just a sled. So I remember being kind of confused when I heard someone talking about their toboggan and it was actually a hat. Especially since at the time I was in Alabama, I was like, there's no sleds here. They won't say like 10th grade or 11th grade. They do grade 10, grade 11. They say, you know, a lot. I don't know if that's everywhere in Canada. I haven't been to everywhere in Canada, but where I was, people did say, you know, a lot. I had a lot of friends that would call you bud. And that's also something that happened a lot there. They also say Z instead of Z, which I never got into that. I always say Z. So there's even some interesting stuff with their money too. Their $1 coins are called loonies. And it's mostly because there is the bird, the loon on the coin. But then the toonie, it's just kind of combining it with the loonie, but it's just a bunch of loonies and toonies. And their paper money isn't paper, it's plastic and multicolored. So it's always fun to see all different colors of money. So their spelling isn't that much different, but there is a couple things that kind of take after British way of spelling things. So they'll do OU instead of O, like color and favorite. They'll also do RE instead of ER, like in center. I'm not entirely sure if there are probably parts of the US that will do the RE instead of ER, but I'm not entirely sure. Apart from language, I was talking to a Canadian high school friend recently, and she really wanted me to mention that very much like the US, Canada is the home of people from all kinds of different backgrounds. So it includes a lot of culture and cuisine and other things, and they all kind of live next to each other. So that's pretty similar to the US. Honestly, from a surface perspective, some may disagree with me, but Canada isn't that much different from the US in that even within the US, for example, there'll be a huge difference between different states. So Canada particularly is kind of similar to North America. But even within Canada, there are a lot of differences, just like there's a big difference between, say, rural Alabama and Miami or and you know, Canada is the same way. They've got a huge amount of land. They're the second largest country in the world. And even though it is in the north, don't let that fool you into thinking that it is always cold. The weather will be differing depending on where you are. Generally during the winter, yeah, it's cold, but during the summer, especially in more southern parts of Canada, it can get really warm. So I'll probably talk mostly about Ontario, Nova Scotia, because I have experience with them. For example, Nova Scotia is a lot milder than Ontario in a lot of ways. It's much colder, much colder in the winter, but it's also a lot hotter in the summer. So it does get hot, maybe not Southern US hot, but it does kind of get hot. The Canadians didn't really care about the cold. I guess your body acclimates, because I definitely remember going out to shovel the driveway and it'd be like 32 degrees and I'd be in jeans and a t-shirt. I really don't think I'd be able to do that now, but you know, at the time, I guess when you're living there for years, you get used to it. So also here in South Carolina and other parts of the South, it'll snow once, everything gets shut down. But in Canada, it's constantly snowing throughout the winter. So work doesn't really get closed, school doesn't get shut down. The only time school got canceled for me was when the buses couldn't run. So it would have to snow early enough, yet late enough that the snow plows and the salt trucks would be able to get out on the roads on time to melt the snow and clear the roads. We actually had a hotline that we could call, and an automated voice would tell us which schools in the area were closing and which ones would be still open. So me and my friends would kind of calculate what time of the night will it have to close, or will it have to snow for school to be closed in this day? Roughly about 4. Now, there were actually a couple times though where the buses wouldn't run, but it wasn't because they couldn't, it's because there's a snowstorm coming later in the day and they probably would be able to run later in the evening or in the afternoon. So school on those days is very rare, but school in those days was optional. So you could go if you had the means to go, or you could stay home. Some of the things we would do during days off in the winter, we would pour water down the hills. This is mostly, I think, in Ontario, but we would pour water on the hill and it would freeze. And it would make the best ice slides. And the hills and that school that I was going to were pretty nice too. So even like on weekends, families would come out and sled or go down the ice slides that it created earlier in the day. Also during the winter, a lot of Canadians will go on vacation to Florida. It didn't matter if it was in the middle of February, if there was school going on, they would just go for a week or 2 weeks or however long they wanted. In the summertime in Nova Scotia, it would stay light for so long. I don't think it got dark until probably 9 o'clock at night, which was very shocking when I moved there for high school, because I don't remember it being that dramatic in Ontario. Maybe I'm misremembering, but there would be daylight in the middle of the summer. So therefore, the kind of evening activities were booming. I mean, if the light is out that long, people were outside and they were doing fun things. I think a lot of northern Canada. Oh, I mentioned that already, actually. So when I first started trying to come up with differences and similarities between Canada and the US, I wasn't going to put food on there. Oh, I forgot about that slide. Oh, there's the deer. I wasn't originally going to put food because I couldn't really think of anything that was different. But the more I thought about it, I did think of a couple things, and I will tell you about them because there are a few, either some of them are kind of traditional Canadian foods, and then some of them are just very common up there. So just like the US, what's popular and what people eat will vary a little bit from place to place. Um, so everybody's probably heard of Canadian bacon. It's basically ham though. It comes from the back of the legs, I think, of the pig. I did have to look that up because I honestly couldn't tell the difference. But they do have regular bacon too. It's not just Canadian bacon, which I think a lot of people in the US that I talk to think that, oh, there's just no regular bacon. Another huge French food, it's French Canadian, is poutine. It's basically, I wish I had pictures, but I was having trouble finding ones that weren't copyrighted. But it's this, they're fries with cheese curds and a lot of gravy on top. And sometimes they'll put meat toppings and they'll throw those on there. Beaver tails is this deep fried dough that they'll put a bunch of different toppings on. There was this part of Halifax that I went to where they had those food carts out on the boardwalk by the harbors, and they would sell beaver tails. Some of the toppings would be like Nutella or bananas or pretty much anything. I think mostly beaver tail has to do with, it's pretty long. Lobster rolls. There's a lot of seafood in Canada, particularly along the coasts. I think most of the population is kind of in that area. So lobster rolls are great. There's a lot of other different seafood too. Bannock is actually, it was once a staple of the Canadian Indigenous people. So it's just a very simple bread, but it's really good. There's in Canada a lot now, there'll be a lot more modern takes on it. Sometimes people bake it, some people will fry it, and there's always new variations popping up. Maple taffy is fun. It's definitely a winter treat. So the way you prepare it is you get this flat swash of snow and you take maple syrup and you pour it directly onto the line. And it hardens really quickly within a very short amount of time. And you take a popsicle stick and you roll it up in it like a lollipop. So that's probably one of my favorites. Another, it's from British Columbia, the Nanaimo bars. You actually don't bake these. They have this crumb base, and then they've got less layers of custard and chocolate. And there's this Saskatoon berry pie. I've never had this one actually, but apparently it's very sweet and almondy. The city was actually named after the berry. So the Saskatoon berry pie is from Saskatoon, which was named after the berry, and it is in Saskatchewan. Then there's the pudding chamar. It's basically a pudding cake. This was a French Canadian dessert, again, created during the Great Depression. It was just supposed to be a very simple and cheap dessert that everybody could make and everybody could afford. But it's essentially a cake batter with maple syrup and raisins. It's pretty good. And I would be a bad Canadian if I didn't mention Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons is the best coffee place ever. Ask anyone. Just kidding. But they call their donut holes Timbits. You'll often hear Canadians say they're going to Tim's or they're going to Timmy's, and they call it whole Tim Hortons. If you go in, ask for a double. I've heard the term only in Canada. Maybe it's, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's in other places of North America too, but I've only heard the term double in Canada, and it just means 2 sugars, 2 cream. So you can go to Timmy's and get a double coffee. Or my favorite was the double chai tea. But these are all really great treats, and you absolutely don't want to miss them out if you do decide to go. So moving on, sports, like in a lot of countries, is a huge thing in Canada. Most notably is hockey. It's also very popular in the Northeast US. My mom likes to joke that there's a country border and then there's a sports border. So they have the National Hockey League, which is professional, for those of you who maybe aren't from the North, professional North American Hockey League in North America. So there are 31 total teams, 24 are American and 7 are Canadian. Which nation do they belong to? I don't know. Who knows? They don't care. It was founded in Montreal, which is the Canadian capital. Some Canadians actually support American teams over the Canadian teams. For example, I knew a lot of people who would go for the Boston Bruins, and so it's mostly Nova Scotia. And granted, Nova Scotia does have a really good relationship with Nova Scotia and Halifax specifically, because there was an explosion in Halifax in 1917, and it was devastating. It killed more than 1,700 people, and Boston provided a lot of medical relief. But they send Boston a Christmas tree every year as a sign of goodwill. But yeah, some of them go for American hockey teams over the Canadian ones. I guess it's just preference. I've never really been too into sports, but those of you who are, you know what it's like. But if you are into football, they do have a Canadian Football League, and it actually is pretty popular. Maybe not as popular as hockey, but they do have one. The other sport, it'll be the only other sport I mentioned for now, although there is a lot of others like sledding and snowboarding. My high school did have a snowboarding team and a skiing team. But I'm going to mention curling, which is honestly, it's a pretty unusual sport. It's originally Scottish. I don't know if it's in the US or not. I've never heard of it in the US, but it is one of the Olympic sports, I think. And it's not huge everywhere in Canada, but it definitely has a following. So I'll go into maybe the basic rules because I'm sure a lot of you haven't heard of it, or maybe you have, but the goal is to slide this giant 44-pound stone over a sheet of ice that is 146 to 150 feet long towards this giant bullseye that's on the other side. The ice is pebbled, and that's caused by they take water and they sprinkle it onto the ice, and that allows it freezes like that, and it gives kind of a texture, and it's really good traction for the stone. It gives it a little bit more grip. The stones are they have a predetermined rotation, so it's called curling because the stones purposefully don't go in a straight line. They do have a curved pattern, kind of like when you're bowling and it doesn't go towards towards the pins like you want it to. So what they do to kind of control the movement of it is the players will brush the ice with these brooms. It's really interesting to watch. I do recommend like finding a YouTube video or something and looking up curling, because they go along, they've tossed the stone, they've thrown the stone, and they are following the stone with these brooms, and they are just scraping the ice or brushing the ice, I think is what they call it. And then brush the ice and brush the ice, and apparently it helps affect the speed and direction of the stone. So you're put into 4 teams, 2 teams, 4 people in each team. The team captain is called the skip. Each team will throw 8 rocks per round. The team with the most rocks closest to the center of the bullseye gets the points, and this goes on for about 6 to 10 rounds, called ends, and the person with the most points at the end Before I move on to vacation spots, I'm gonna just talk about some fun facts. They're kind of random, but they're pretty interesting. So for example, the recycling in Nova Scotia in particular is really intense. We have recycling in the US, but not on this level. Everything is sorted. They won't even pick up your trash if you have more than 3 bags of regular trash. And if it wasn't regular trash, it had to be sorted into clear plastic bags so they could see exactly what it was. So there was a bag for cardboard, plastic, aluminum, glass. And they even had these brown bags for organics too. You wouldn't put your like banana peels and throughout the rest of the trash, you put it in these brown bags in a green container. And everybody had them in their kitchen, and it's just where you put yours. When I was at school, we would have 3 or 4 trash cans at different times. Like 4 trash cans, and each one was for a different recyclable. And they're very, very specific. Another thing that's just interesting is there is a regional ceremony in Newfoundland. It's really close to Nova Scotia, but it's called Kiss the Fish or Kiss the Cod. And yes, you literally kiss a fish. The point is apparently they call it a screeching ceremony. And it's where they welcome in outsiders and kind of make them into honorary Newfoundlanders or people from Labrador. So you go in, you have to recite a limerick and kiss the fish, and then you have to down a glass of screech rum. I've never been to Newfoundland, so I didn't do this, but a friend of mine told me about it, and it seems kind of funny actually. It's usually like in a bar. There are different people at the bar apparently who will do that for you. The drinking age in Canada is 19 and the smoking age is 18. And that changed the dynamic a little bit in high school, particularly in the last couple of years, because the smoking age is 18. So we had designated smoking areas at school for people who needed to smoke or wanted to smoke. Whereas in the US, it's both 21. So that is a pretty big difference. Also, their education is a lot more standardized than in the US, both inside and outside of school. So every grade is pretty much at the same place. Doesn't matter what school you go to. They're pretty much at the same place. It's very universal, and it even extends to learning instruments. So I did piano growing up, and you know how in the US, or maybe there's when you are learning an instrument, you go to a private, you often will go to their home and it's a private lesson and they teach you. It's the same in Canada, but if you want to be officially recognized as being of a certain skill level, you had to take a pretty extensive exam that included theory, piano technique, and the pieces performed. And this at least is how it was with piano. I don't know if it was with other instruments, but no matter what teacher you had to take these exams if you were going to be recognized as being at a certain skill level. And it was across Canada, or at least where I was. But yeah, so we'll move on to vacation spots. I'm gonna talk about places I've been to first, and then I'll kind of talk a bit about places I haven't been to, but I did do a little bit of research on them. But they're all great places. I highly recommend them. So it's interesting because when you're living in a country, you're living there, you're not really on vacation. So it didn't even really occur to me to actually go and visit different places very much, except And except like at the very end, I was about to graduate and my friends were like, oh my gosh, you've never been to Peggy's Cove? It's like 45 minutes away or less. I don't even know. So the first place that I'm going to talk about is just Halifax in general, the city of Halifax. They've got beautiful harbors. They'll do these boat tours while you're there. They've got these boats that they start actually on land, they go into the water, and then they drive back up on land so they can be in the water and on land. And there's a tour guide and they'll give you history about the area. They also call there's the boardwalk that's along the harbor, and there are a lot of entertainers there, food vendors, and just a lot of people walking along and having a lot of fun. And there are a lot of historical places in the area as well. So Peggy's Cove is kind of outside Halifax. It's the home of the Peggy's Point Lighthouse. It's absolutely beautiful, very quaint, and it still has an active fishing community, but the waves can be kind of dangerous, so don't go swimming and don't climb on wet rocks. I really recommend going in the summer. The next place, there's Halifax and Peggy's Cove. That's on a pretty calm day. The day I went to Peggy's Cove, it was pretty cloudy. The waves were very strong. The next place I'll talk about is Banff. So it is the Banff National Park in the Banff Mountains. It's in Alberta. And if you love the mountains, I highly recommend this one. The town is actually the highest in Canada. It's at 4,537 feet. The mountain that's highest in Banff is Mount Forbes, and it's 11,850 feet. It is also Canada's very first national park. There are thousands of miles of hiking trails, and it's got a lot of great lakes as well, like Lake Hector, which is the largest natural lake in that area, and Lake Minnewanka, which is a dammed lake. It is open all year, but it does peak in July and August. So Jasper National Park, it's the largest national park in the Canadian Rockies. It extends over 11,000 square miles. There are a lot of trails as well, but do some research before planning a trip because it is closed certain times of the year for caribou conservation. Some activities include snowshoeing in the winter, pond skating, canyon ice walks, and wildlife watching. It also has the Niet Hot Springs, but I think those are currently closed, unfortunately. The next place is Vancouver. So put this in because maybe you're more interested in seeing some of the cityscapes located in British Columbia. Or this one's located in British Columbia, but cityscapes everywhere, because some people are city people, some people are country people. But it is got some gorgeous architecture. It's a huge city. There's lots to do. It's got a bunch of art and cultural activity programs. I was kind of browsing their website a little bit, and they have right now this form of art and health for seniors to kind of work with art professionals and interns to dance residencies, and they have a poetry in the park project. So one of those poetry projects is right now they're calling it the Canine Library. I don't know if this is a temporary project or if it's something that they do long term, but basically you get a dog for 15 minutes. You have a dog and you get to read them your favorite poetry in the Emery Arms Book. Plus dog. But Vancouver, it has 230 parks, 10 beaches, and a lake as well. Also one of the warmest cities in Canada. So if you really aren't into the cold, go to Vancouver. So Montreal is another pretty big city. It's in Quebec. A lot of people in Montreal speak French. There are also lots of things to do here. There's botanical gardens, a lot of festivals, the Loesis musical events. It's where they have these free classical music performances in the churches, and it won't just be classical, it'll also be jazz and folk and goes on. It's got stunning architecture. There's this bridge that it's the first connecting bridge, and it's illuminated at night, and it changes colors depending on what season. You also get a really good look at colonial New France before it started going by the more common name of Canada. Got a lot of really nice cathedrals, chateaus, and nice cobblestone streets. There's also something called the Underground City. It's 20.5 miles of pedestrian walkways beneath the city. So apparently 500 people will circulate this on a daily basis, but it connects to pretty much everywhere. It'll connect to the metro, train, bus stations, hotels, restaurants, shops, museums, and the skyscrapers. There's this stained glass wall that's devoted to musical history and other art. And in Montreal is also a fragment of the Berlin Wall that was donated in 1982 for Montreal's 350th anniversary at the Montreal World Trade Center. Well, I think that's all I have. Yep, there are my sources. Are there any questions that you guys have for me?
And just a reminder, if you want to, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask questions, or you can continue to type them into the chat. Either way works with us, but feel free if you'd like to talk in person to go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your questions.
Don't be shy.
All day it says. Bob's down in the bottom left-hand corner somewhere.
Well, I'm looking. I don't see it. I would be glad to ask a question. I'll just type it.
Oh, I can hear you.
I'd like to know why you left Canada and moved to the United States and when.
Okay. So I was actually in Canada because of my dad's job. So he works with Michelin, and we just moved a lot to different plants. So one of the plants was in Kitchener in Ontario, and the other was in Waterville in Nova Scotia. It's probably been about 5 years since I moved out. It was just kind of the end of the time. I graduated high school. I'm not a Canadian citizen, so I'd have to get a work or a student visa to go to school there. And so I decided to just straight from high school in Canada to move back to Alabama and go to school there.
Sophie, we had one question about needing a passport to visit Canada. I know you and I talked about this right before we started.
Right. Yes, as an American citizen, you do need a passport to cross into Canada, but I don't think you need it to go visit Niagara Falls, which I didn't really talk about, but Niagara Falls, actually, that's another really great place to visit. But yeah, so.
It also
you-
varies a little bit by some states. 'Cause, as I mentioned in comments, I know coming from Vermont that you can get a special license, a Vermont state license, that basically lets you travel into at least into Quebec, Canada, without having to bring
Okay.
your passport with you.
Well, I wasn't aware of that. I do know that there's a ferry you can take from Massachusetts to Nova Scotia. I don't know if you need a passport there, but maybe there is some sort of special visa essentially that you can get to cross. But that's very interesting. I didn't know that.
We had another question about asking just, are there lots of things to see in Nova Scotia? I think there probably are, but what are some of the things that you think are worth seeing in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that. Maybe I forgot to say that was Nova Scotia though, that would be my bad. But the Peggy's Cove, the lighthouse that is in Halifax, that is in Nova Scotia. The harbors and the boardwalk, those are also in Nova Scotia. The area outside is also, outside of the main city, is also very beautiful. I lived in Fall River, which is a really nice place to go. I don't know if it would be a place you'd vacation to, because I don't know, I was living there, so it's hard to think of that, really, I guess. But definitely the harbors and Peggy's Cove. And there are a lot of lakes too, actually. I forgot to mention that. There are tons of lakes. So a lot of people will go boating. Stuff like that.
Suzanne asked if you'd ever been to Winnipeg and knew anything about Winnipeg.
I wish I could say I had been to Winnipeg. I know of Winnipeg, but I have not been there, and I don't really know that much about it or care about that.
Also a question, if you know, you may not, when Canadian travel will open back up. I know that a lot of countries right now are still on lockdown. I think they're still on lockdown currently.
Right. I'm not sure when they'll open up. I do know they are still closed. I'm pretty sure for most situations, there might be a couple exceptions that I'm not entirely aware of. But I wish I did have more information on that as well, but I think they're still waiting. I know when I was looking up research on some of the places that I talked about that you could visit that I hadn't been to, there were still a lot of COVID procedures and notices that they are closed to international travel or travelers coming in. But hopefully as time goes on, they'll be able to open up again soon.
And I'm sure they'll want to open up too, because I know that they get a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of tourism from the States up there.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
Any other questions from anyone tonight? They're great questions, by the way.
Yeah, very great questions. Thank you very much.
Well, with that, I guess, if there's no more questions now, Sophie, thank you again for sharing some of your experience and knowledge about Canada, our neighbor to the north that I think a lot of us down here in South Carolina oftentimes don't think about. Again, I was lucky to grow up just south of the border of Canada, so I got to
Right,
spend
right.
some time there. But for those of you here in South Carolina who've never been or didn't know a lot about it, I hope this was informative, and I hope maybe it puts Canada on your map of somewhere once we can all travel again that you'd like to go. Sophie, do you have that slide that
Oh,
tells
yeah.
the other upcoming events for this armchair series? I know it's probably all the way back at the beginning, but
Where'd it go? Dun, dun, dun. There we go.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah, so we've got 3 more upcoming events. They will be virtual like this evening's was. So the next one is a week from today, actually. It's next Thursday, and that'll be about Denmark. And again, we'll have speaker presenting, talking about Denmark, things to do there, how their culture and geography and history is different from the United States, and probably how it's similar. We've got Bulgaria coming up on March 23rd, and then Colombia. And Sophie, I believe it's one of your coworkers is actually
Yeah, 2 of them actually.
Two of
I think they're
them,
doing it together. Yeah.
So we'll have some more library staff in those ones. But definitely check it out. Definitely visit this website here, this greenvillelibrary.org/adult-virtual-events. We have a continuing list of things that we are adding for virtual events that you can sign up for like this through Zoom. We'll continue to add those. Hopefully, we're all fingers crossed. I was just having conversations today that sooner rather than later, we will be back and doing some in-person events at the library system, but we're not quite there yet. But we will continue to provide virtual programs and events in the meantime. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you have a good evening, rest of your week. And thanks again, Sophie.
Thank you. And thank all of you for coming.
Good night.